In the year 713 CE, in the capital city of Chang'an, a woman walked out of a Buddhist temple. She had been hiding there for 3 days. Outside the temple walls, her nephew's soldiers were waiting. He was 27 years old. She was 48. She had known him since he was a child. She had helped put his father on the throne. She had fought beside him in the night when they killed Empress Wei together. 3 days ago, she had fled to this temple because his soldiers had just executed everyone she had ever trusted. Her chancellors, her generals, her spies, her allies. In a single morning, her nephew had dismantled the network she had spent 15 years building. Now she came out of the temple because there was nowhere else to go. Her name was Taiping, Princess Taiping. And in the year 713 CE, she was ordered by her nephew to take her own life. This is not a story about evil versus good. This is not a story about the nephew, though history has made him famous. His name was Longji, and he became Emperor Xuanzong, and his reign is called the Kaiyuan era, the opening of the golden age of the Tang Dynasty. The poets wrote about him. The paintings survived him. This is the story of the woman who had to die before any of that could begin. She was born around the year 665 CE, in the city of Luoyang, into a family that was already rewriting the rules of the world. Her father was Emperor Gaozong, the 8th emperor of the Tang Dynasty. Her mother was a woman who had entered the palace as a concubine at 13, who had survived the Buddhist monastery after Gaozong's death, who had returned to court, who had outmaneuvered every rival in the palace, who had become empress, and who would eventually become emperor in her own right. Her name was Wu Zetian, and she was the only woman in 5,000 years of Chinese history to rule as emperor. Taiping was the youngest child of Gaozong and Wu Zetian. She had 2 older brothers, Li Hong and Li Xian, and a third brother, Li Dan, who was born around the same time she was. Li Hong, the crown prince, died young under circumstances that historians still debate. His death is one of the great unresolved questions of Tang history. Did Wu Zetian poison her own son to clear the path to her own power? The record is silent. The suspicion is not. Taiping grew up watching her mother do what no woman in China had ever done. And Wu Zetian looked at her youngest daughter and reportedly said, "She is like me." In the new book of Tang, one of the most authoritative histories of the Tang Dynasty, those words are preserved exactly. 主方娥广仪多阴谋天后常为累我. She had a broad forehead and a wide jawline, the historians tell us. A face built for power, they imply. And Wu Zetian said, "She is like me." That was not a compliment given to a daughter. That was a recognition of a rival. Taiping was married for the first time around the year 680 CE, when she was approximately 15 years old. Her husband was a young man named Xue Xiao Shisao. He was the son of Princess Changcheng, which made him a member of the Tang imperial family on his mother's side. He was handsome. He was well educated. And according to the sources that survive, he and Taiping were genuinely happy together. Over the next 8 years they had 4 children. 2 sons. 2 daughters. The youngest daughter, the sources say, was still in her cradle when everything ended. In the year 688 CE, a prince named Li Chong, the son of another of Wu Zetian's sons, but a son who had been demoted and was living in exile, raised an army against Wu Zetian's government. Li Chong claimed he was defending the Tang dynasty against her. He gathered approximately 20,000 soldiers and marched toward Luoyang. Li Chong was not a serious military threat. Wu Zetian's forces defeated him quickly. He was captured and executed. But the episode revealed something Wu Zetian could not ignore. There were still people inside the imperial family who would resist her. One of those people apparently was Xue Xiao's older brother Xue Yi. The historical record is disputed on whether Xue Yi actually participated in Li Chong's rebellion, or whether he was merely associated with him in some way. But Wu Zetian treated the matter as settled. Xue Yi was executed. And Xue Xiao, the husband who had not, as far as the surviving evidence suggests, done anything against Wu Zetian, was arrested. He was beaten 100 times with a heavy bamboo rod. Then he was thrown into a cell in Luoyang. And then he was left there, starved. Taiping was nursing their youngest child when she learned what was happening to her husband. We do not know what she did with that information. Whether she went to her mother. Whether she begged. Whether she said nothing. The historical record does not preserve a single word from her during this period. What we know is the outcome. In the year 689 CE, approximately 1 year after Xue Xiao's arrest, he died in that cell. The official account says he was starved to death. Some later sources suggest he was beaten to death. The distinction may not matter. The effect is the same. The young husband of Wu Zetian's favorite daughter was dead, and Taiping, who had been married for approximately 8 years, was a widow with 4 children under the age of about 8, the youngest still an infant. Wu Zetian responded to her daughter's grief with a land grant. She increased Taiping's fee from 350 households to 1,200, a political compensation, dressed in the language of maternal consolation. The marriage was over. The mourning period had not even ended when Wu Zetian began arranging for Taiping's second husband. The second marriage was, in every sense, a political transaction. Wu Zetian wanted Taiping remarried to a member of the Wu clan, her own family, to tie the princess firmly to the Zhou dynasty she was building. The first choice was Wu Changxi, a nephew of Wu Zetian's. But Wu Qingxi fell ill and died before the marriage could take place. Whether this was coincidence or something else, the historical record does not say. Wu Zetian then selected another nephew, Wu Yanzi Wu Youji. There was one complication. Wu Yanzi was already married. Wu Zetian ordered his existing wife killed to clear the path for her daughter. The marriage took place in the year 690 CE. Taiping was approximately 25 years old. She would remain married to Wu Yanzi until his death in the year 712 CE, a marriage that produced no children and, as far as the sources suggest, no warmth. This was the woman who entered the Shenlong coup in 705 CE, twice widowed by violence, once by her own mother, carrying a lifetime of political debt and a title that no woman had ever held before. Wu Zetian died on December 16, 705 CE, in the palace at Luoyang. She was 81 years old. By the end, she was weak, isolated, and increasingly disconnected from power. The men who had surrounded her in her final years, the Zhang brothers Zhang Changzong and Zhang Yizong, controlled access to her. They spoke for her. They made decisions in her name. When she died, those 2 men became the biggest obstacle to the restoration of the Tang dynasty. They had to go. The conspiracy came together quickly. A group of senior officials, Zhang Jianji, Lu Yizong, and others, reached out to the military commanders in charge of the Imperial Guard. And they reached out to Taiping. Taiping joined because she understood something that the officials may not have fully grasped. She had the most to gain from Wu Zetian's final legacy being dismantled. Her mother's political philosophy had always been, eliminate every rival, trust no one, rule alone. That philosophy had built an empire. It had also made enemies of everyone who came after. If the Zhou dynasty were to be truly ended, and the Tang truly restored, the men who had served Wu Zetian most loyally, the Zhang brothers above all, had to be destroyed. On January 20, 705 CE, a date preserved in stone inscriptions and imperial records, the conspirators moved. They entered the palace at night through a gate called the Tuanmu Gate. They led a group of 500 soldiers into the inner palace complex. Zhang Changzong and Zhang Yizong were killed in their quarters. The Zhang brothers' bodies were cut into pieces, an act that symbolized both the thoroughness of their destruction and the personal rage that had built up against them over years of petty tyranny. Wu Zetian was found in her private chamber. She was 81 years old, frail, and by all accounts genuinely surprised by what had happened. The officials told her the dynasty was reverting to Tang. She did not resist. She had no choice but to accept. Within days, her son Li Xian, Emperor Zhongzong, was restored to the throne. The Zhou dynasty was over. Wu Zetian was dead within the year. And Taiping, the youngest daughter who had joined the conspiracy and helped bring it about, was rewarded with a title that no princess in Chinese history had ever received, Zhenguo Taiping Gongzhu, town-saving Princess Taiping. The word zhen, to guard, to save, to hold, was a military term. It was the kind of word you used for a general who had defended a city under siege. Wu Zetian had been given honorary military titles throughout her reign. Now her daughter held one too. But Taiping was not a general. She was a princess who had played her part in the night. And she was not finished. For the next several years Taiping watched. She was not in power yet, her brother was on the throne, and for the first few years, power was shared uneasily between Li Xian, his wife Empress Wei, and the Wu family remnants who had survived the transition. Empress Wei is a figure who deserves her own episode. But for Taiping's story, what matters is this. Empress Wei watched Wu Zetian rule and decided she wanted the same thing. When her husband, Emperor Zhongzong, proved too weak to resist her, she began taking power for herself. She appointed her own allies. She arranged for the murder of anyone who opposed her. And she began to position herself as the next woman who would rule China. Taiping could have allied with her. Two women, each with their own power base, might have found a way to share what neither could fully claim. Instead, they chose war. The reason is not hard to understand. There was only one throne. The system did not allow for two women to govern. It barely allowed for one. And Taiping, who had been raised by the greatest female ruler in Chinese history, who had watched her mother build an empire from nothing, who had been told since childhood that she was like her mother, Taiping had no intention of standing behind Empress Wei. The conflict was not personal. It was structural. The system had room for one woman at the top, and they both wanted it. Think about that for a moment. Two women, each with a legitimate claim to power, and a system that left them exactly one option: destroy each other. Which is exactly what happened. The men watched, and then they took what was left. In the year 710 CE, Empress Wei moved first. She poisoned her own husband, Emperor Zhongzong, and installed a young boy as puppet emperor. She was going to be the regent, and then she was going to be more. Taiping responded by finding the one person in the court who had both the military power and the personal ambition to stop Empress Wei. That person was her nephew, Longji. Longji was the son of Emperor Ruizong, Taiping's youngest brother. Longji was approximately 25 years old in 710 CE. He was the prince of Linzhou. He was, by every account, extraordinarily capable, a skilled rider, a trained archer, a man who had grown up in the political shadows and learned how to survive. And he wanted to be emperor. Taiping allied with him. They agreed to move against Empress Wei together. The plan was simple. Longji would bring the imperial guards, the ones he had been quietly cultivating for months, and Taiping would provide political legitimacy and coordination inside the palace. On the night of July 21, 710 CE, they struck. The conspirators entered the palace through the Hanyuan Gate. They killed Empress Wei's loyalists. They killed Annal Princess, the emperor's daughter who had been her mother's most ambitious partner in crime. They killed everyone who stood with the Wei faction. And then they went to the Taiji Palace, the innermost sanctum of imperial power, where a 16-year-old boy named Li Chongmao was sitting on the throne. Li Chongmao had been installed by Empress Wei hours earlier. He was the fourth son of Emperor Zhongzong, and he was not ready for any of this. He was terrified. He was sitting on the most powerful chair in the world and he had no idea what to do. Taiping walked into the chamber. The sources describe her as having taken Li Chongmao by the hand and leading him away from the throne. That is the polite version. Some later accounts are less delicate. They say she pulled him off, dragged him down. In either case, the result was the same. The 16-year-old boy who had been emperor for less than a day was removed from the throne. Taiping's brother Li Dan, who had been emperor before and had abdicated under pressure from Wu Zetian years earlier, was restored. And Longji, the nephew, was named crown prince. In the space of one night, Taiping had changed the dynasty twice. The years between 710 and 713 CE were the years of Taiping's peak power. Her brother, Emperor Ruizong, was not a strong ruler. He had never really wanted the throne, and once it was his again, he had no idea what to do with it. So he asked his sister. The historical record is unambiguous on this point. Ruizong did not make a single significant decision without consulting Taiping first. When she was not in the palace, he sent messengers to her residence to ask what she thought. The palace officials learned quickly. Whatever Taiping said, the emperor agreed to. Her wealth by this point was almost beyond comprehension. The Tang dynasty's fief system granted land and the tax revenue from a set number of households to important figures. A normal prince received 800 to 1,000 households. A normal princess received at most 350. Taiping had been granted, by her brother after the Tanglong coup, a fief of 5,000 households, and she negotiated it upward to 10,000. 10,000 households. 1 in 300 households in the entire Tang tax base belonged to her. She used this wealth to build an empire inside the empire. She controlled the silk trade in both Chang'an and Luoyang. She controlled the horse trade, which meant she controlled the military supply chain. She operated intelligence networks from a literary salon in the Pingkong Entertainment District of Chang'an, where poets and scholars gathered to recite verses and, simultaneously, to pass information. She trained foreign slaves as personal spies, monitoring the movements and conversations of court officials. The scholars who have studied the Luoyang archives, particularly the grain reserve records, have found physical evidence of her reach. Bricks stamped with the character Taiping, have been recovered from the Hongjia granary, the imperial food storage facility. She was not merely wealthy, she controlled the food supply of the capital. By the year 712 C, Taiping had what she needed. She had the money, she had the spies, she had the political connections, she had the chancellors. 5 of the 7 most powerful officials in the government had been appointed by her. She did not yet have the throne. The collision, when it came, was inevitable. In the year 712 CE, Emperor Ruizong did something unusual. He abdicated. He voluntarily stepped down from the throne and passed it to his son Longji. The official reason was that Ruizong wished to devote himself to Buddhist practice. The real reason, most historians believe, was that he recognized his sister would not stop until she had total power, and that his son was the only thing standing between her and the throne. By making Longji emperor while he himself lived on as Taiping's puppet, Ruizong was playing one final card. It did not work. Longji, now Emperor Xuanzong, was not a puppet. He was brilliant, calculating, and 27 years old. He had grown up watching his grandmother Wu Zetian rule. He had learned from the Zhang brothers' mistakes. He knew what it meant to be underestimated by someone who thought they were in control. And Taiping, who had helped put him on the throne, underestimated him. She continued to appoint her own people to key positions. She continued to demand that her brother, now a retired emperor, a Taishang Huang and emperor emeritus, issue decrees on her behalf. She met with her chancellors and her generals and planned, and then she made a final fatal decision. According to multiple historical sources, she conspired to have Longji killed. The method varies by account. Some say she planned to have him poisoned through drugs mixed into his food. Others say she was working with military commanders who were preparing to move against him by force. In either case, the intent was the same: to remove the emperor and install someone more pliable, possibly herself, possibly a figurehead, possibly her own choice. Longji learned of the plot. He moved first. In the 8th month of 713 CE, on a single day that the historical record marks in precise detail, Longji struck. He summoned his loyal soldiers, men who had been quietly loyal to him and him alone, and gave the order. The 5 chancellors who served Taiping were arrested and executed. General Li Jingji, one of the most powerful military commanders in the capital, was killed. The other conspirators, officials, ministers, generals who had been meeting in Taiping's residence for months, were hunted down and killed. By the time the sun set that day, Taiping's entire network was gone. Taiping fled. She ran to a Buddhist temple on a hill south of the capital, the Xinghua Temple, and she hid there for 3 days. What she did during those 3 days we do not know. Whether she prayed, whether she planned, whether she understood finally that it was over. On the 3rd day she came out. Her brother, the retired emperor, her own brother Li Dan, went to Longji and begged him to spare his sister's life. The sources preserve this moment. The retired emperor, who had spent his life deferring to his sister, now went to his son and pleaded. Longji refused. Taiping was ordered to commit suicide. She was given the traditional imperial acknowledgement, a silk cord or a blade or poison depending on the account, and she was told to use it. She was 48 years old. The deaths of her children followed quickly. All of Taiping's sons and daughters were executed. The children she had borne in her first marriage to Xue Xiao, the children she had raised after watching their father starve to death in a Luoyang cell, were killed. The children of her second marriage to Wu Yanzi were killed. All except one. Her second son, Xue Chongjian, the child she had borne in her first marriage, the boy who had been an infant when his father died, had been communicating with Longji for months before the coup. He had been Li Longji's informant inside his own mother's household. He had been feeding the emperor information about her plans. When the executions came, Xue Chongjian was spared. Li Longji acknowledged his service and restored him to his official positions. Xue Chongjian lived out his life in the Tang bureaucracy. His tomb epitaph has been recovered by archaeologists, a stone slab buried in the ground for 13 centuries that tells, in careful official language, the story of a man who survived by betraying his mother. There is a bitter irony embedded in that stone. Taiping was buried near Shenlong, the great tomb complex that her mother had built, the twin pyramids of Gaozong and Wu Zetian that still stand today near the city of Xi'an. She was interred, in the end, next to the mother who had destroyed her first marriage and the father whose throne she had spent her life trying to claim. Here is what the history books will not tell you in one sentence. The Kaiyuan era, the golden age of the Tang Dynasty, the poets and the painters and the open frontier, was built on the bodies of women who tried to reach what men were simply born to inherit. After Taiping, the system learned its lesson. The barriers went higher. The punishments went faster. Empress Wei had tried. Taiping had tried. And both of them had burned in the same fire. A fire that the system had lit, and then watched, and then walked away from unchanged. The throne was never really meant for a woman. And the system that enforced that, it never had to say its name. It just called itself the natural order. And that name survived long after Taiping's.